It's Radio Free 501c, the voice of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm Cecilia Sapp. Don't forget to subscribe. You don't want to miss any of our exciting conversations. Like this week, I'm welcoming back Cynthia Lockrey, communicator extraordinaire, and we're talking about a topic near and dear to my heart, content creation and repurposing. It's November 6, 2023. Welcome to episode 217. Hey everybody, it's Monday, November 6th, and that means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Sapp. I am a certified association executive and a certified nonprofit professional, and welcome to this week's episode. To our global audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. We are welcoming back this week returning guest, Cynthia Lockrey. She was just with us in September talking about neurodiversity in education and in our professional lives. And now she's back. And we're going to be talking about content creation and repurposing because we all have so much content and we can get so much more out of it. And she's going to talk with us about being more strategic and how we can get our content to work for us instead of us working for the content. So, Cynthia, welcome back. So good to see you again. I always enjoy talking with you. And would you like to say hello to our audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada, and I have worked as a public relations consultant for over 25 years. So, content I have been creating for a few decades now. I also work in the land of advocacy, helping advocate for people with disabilities, also helping people learn how to advocate for themselves. So, when it comes to content, I have two websites, howtocommunications.com for my public relations and learnpatientadvocacy.com for my advocacy, which means I'm creating content all the time for myself, but I'm also creating content for my clients. So this is a world that I live in.
You are definitely the queen of content. You have so
Mhm.
much great stuff. And that's actually how you and I connected as I read one of your blog posts that you had shared on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I really like that topic of stop telling people you're too busy." So it's really, if you have not checked out Cynthia's websites, check them out. They're full of great content, good information, good advice. And so we're here to talk about that. We all create content. I create a little bit of content myself once in a while. So let's start with communication tools. When you and I were talking before the episode, you mentioned that's where you have to start. And how do you start there? What do you think are the questions that we need to ask?
So a lot of times people look at the content and I'm like, stop. Look at the tools that you're using to communicate every day. And I like visual, so I'll work with a client and I'll create just a quick table. And so don't say social media. Is it LinkedIn? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it today? And you go through the channels you have. Then you might have a newsletter. You might have e-blasts. Maybe you have email distribution list. Maybe you have and for your internal communications versus external, how are you communicating to your staff? Then once you've listed all these channels, I want you to have a side that says, this is why we use the tool and how it's used. And then, most importantly, who are the audiences? Because I will tell you, LinkedIn is a completely different audience from Facebook. So, for those of you who are cheating, and I've seen people do this, so I know some of you might be doing it, that use one copy for a post and you cut and paste and you put hashtags in Facebook and you use the same post on Twitter and you use the same post on LinkedIn. Stop doing that. They're different channels, different audiences, but it starts with having this chart. So you have it, and then when you're creating the content, you're thinking already, how am I putting the content out on these different channels I have?
Wow, that's almost like a mini communication audit.
Mm-hmm.
How are you using it, and who are you talking to with it?
Absolutely.
And, I have to admit, as a solopreneur, so basically an army of one with a wonderful contractor that helps me on the back end sometimes, I am guilty of that. I will write one message and I put it everywhere. But that's just me because that's how I'm managing my time. But on the other hand, now that you've got me thinking about that, Cynthia, because I'm thinking, even I use Social Pilot to manage posting messages to all my social media channels. And I could just write separate messages and
Mhm.
for each one and do it very easily. So that's a really good tip. Although, hey, Instagram, what's up with your photo sizes on images? I'm always getting dinged on that, but that's another topic for another day. So we've done our mini communication audit. We have our tools. We know what we're doing. We know who we're talking to, or at least trying to talk to with them. So then our next step would be the actual content. So
Mhm.
could you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so let's look at different content that most of us are producing. So maybe you have a newsletter that you write monthly, quarterly. I've actually moved my clients to quarterly just because people only can absorb so much information. I'm a big fan of writing blogs because here's the deal with your website and search engine optimization, SEO, is the search engines are looking. And if you haven't updated your website for a long time, I have clients that say, oh, I don't even know when we last updated our website. Then Google thinks you're dead.
Mhm.
So you get buried. So what I say to clients is put an update section tab on your website. It doesn't need to be news because that's too much pressure. It doesn't need to be a blog, but something that you once a month, it needs to be consistent, are updating information. So let's say you were to write a blog because you and I both do this. This is the world we live in. And this is why I write a blog once a month, is to keep my search engines happy. So you write this blog. Well, you want to first start before you do anything and think, who is my intended audience? Who is going to care about what it is that I'm writing? And don't do something generic because then nobody connects with it. So it doesn't mean that if I'm writing something that's to professional women who are struggling with work-life balance because they've got young kids, that somebody later in their career with older kids isn't going to resonate. They will, but I'm really trying to speak to a specific person that I would be drinking coffee with. And then from there, you write the content. So I've written this brilliant blog, and then I look at my channels and I'll say, okay, how can I leverage this one piece of content? So it goes on the website. Website is the only digital asset you own because any of these social media channels could fold tomorrow. So it always goes on your website as the mothership. Then you might post, if there's a business to business, professional to professional, you might post something on LinkedIn. I'm amazed at how many organizations ignore LinkedIn, and they really, because we're thinking of recruiting as well. Then you might put something on Facebook or other social media, but there's some other cool things that you can do beyond that. Can you make an infographic out of some fun facts that's in that blog post? Maybe you have a did you know that you could weave in a few did you know or fun facts that from that one piece of content over the next few months that goes back to that content. Here's one that you and I talked about that's worked really well for me is I do two things with my blogs. One, I always write them in Microsoft Word, not on WordPress. Then I save them and then I post it. Every few months, I might say, oh, this blog I can turn into a mini ebook. So for example, I wrote a blog on 5 reasons why you need to quit your volunteer role. That's one of my top blog posts I've written.
Wow.
And so I thought, I know, and people love that post. So I'm like, okay, so I'll take that, work with the graphic designer, I'm not Canva because I want it to look professional. Work with a graphic designer and turn that 5 signs it's time to quit your volunteer role into a visual ebook that's like 8 pages with lots of pretty. The other thing I do is I save these, and every few years, and if you put my name in, Cynthia Lockrey, into Amazon, you will see what I'm talking about. I will then compile them and create an ebook. So, for example, I realized I've written a lot about advocating for kids with disabilities in education. So I took all those blog posts. At the beginning of the ebook, it says this is a compilation of blog posts. And I've created like a 50-page ebook on Kindle. And I also have these ebooks that I give to clients, or I'll share, or if I'm speaking at a conference, it's a value add, or I'll let people give it to their community. All of this is from one piece of content.
That is amazing. And I had never thought about taking an ebook compilation and putting it on Kindle Unlimited at Amazon. I never even would have thought of that. That is fantastic. Now, I have thought about doing ebooks, like you mentioned, but gee, and like you, I do everything in Microsoft Word first. I do not work directly into the website, blog tool or editor, whatever you want to call it. We use Squarespace.
Yes, I have one of my sites is Squarespace.
Okay, yeah. So it's pretty easy to cut and paste, your Microsoft Word in there. But then that way I always have that. I like your idea though about doing an update instead of, it doesn't have to be an article. It doesn't have to be news like we've just, filed an amicus brief or something like that. It could just be a little tidbit. Like, hey, here's a line from this week's podcast. You might
It
find
could be a nice photo with a little, like a photo of, with a nice little description. The idea is for your website not to be dead.
Mm-hmm. It's got to be active. That's right. And and I love that, and I'm always trying, and I think, we're all a work in progress with our work and with our, promotion and things like that and our sharing. So I'm always trying to find ways to connect the content. And I do have some steps in place, and I'm working on getting even better at it, thanks to a lot of your good tips, by the way, from our just one-on-one conversations. I am really trying to work on even better content repurposing. And you've already touched on that a little bit with your suggestion about ebooks and things, but what are some other things that people should know about content repurposing?
Really, a cool way to reuse content is, first of all, get familiar with Google Analytics. Make sure that you're tracking, and you should be doing this anyways, on your website, what is getting the most views. So I stop saying you're so busy. Why you need to stop saying that's my 2 cents are some of the blogs that I know are getting huge traction. Another thing is, look at your social media. You can see as the administrator what your posts are. And I'm always amazed at people who don't do another communications audit of their social media. And you can say, wow, when we talk about this, it really gets eyeballs. So going back to that content, just because you post it once doesn't mean everybody saw it or that they remember. So I like to reuse and recycle. So I will say, hey, not sure if you read this blog, but this one seems to get a lot of traffic, or I've had lots of people say, actually, I have had lots of people say that they quit their volunteer role after reading my article because I say, don't do anything out of obligation, because that's not a motivation.
Right.
So you want to look at that and repurpose. And the other cool thing is, now you can take these things that we've all created, that now I've given you ideas today, and go, maybe I can infographic that. Maybe there's a did you know fact that I can pull. Maybe there's and the list goes on and on. I sometimes just create mini YouTube videos that are 2 minutes that talk about my blog, just a little nugget of something. So the idea is, just because it's done, don't give up on that content because you worked on it. And another thing you can do is, if you go, okay, it needs a tweak for what's happening today, you can rewrite that. You can tweak it and you can post it as a new blog post.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And people don't think about that. And, it's not plagiarism if it's your own work, right? And if you note that it is an update of a previous article, another thing I like to do is maybe I go back, and I've had a conversation with somebody, let's say on member service. So I have a blog post, 5 steps of member service. And I might go find that article again and reshare it and say it's from the archives. And then I write an introduction. This is why I am resharing this article. I think it still has a lot of relevance because I just had a conversation with somebody about it. So I like to do that too. You can think of a fun way to present content again.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to do that. One of the other things I like to do, excuse me, these fall allergies are really kicking my butt, folks, and I apologize for the dry throat. Uh, so, and also I was out doing yard work over the weekend, and it's like, oh my gosh, so then Monday comes and here you go. But anyway, so what I like to do is every week, pretty much at least 3 times a month, I write a fresh blog post. And then that blog post becomes the main message in my weekly newsletter that promotes other things. And the weekly newsletter might have news about the company if there's any new news to share, things like that. Then I record that message as an audio file and share it on my podcast channel. And those tend to be 2 to 5 minute listens, which are just perfect for like if you're taking a walk or something. And then again, you had mentioned like, who is your audience? How are they accessing the information? And that's something I have really tried to be keenly aware of, especially the last 3 or 4 years, because some people like to listen, some people like to read, some people like to watch videos. So I just doing all the trying to push out all those different channels.
As a mom of a child that's dyslexic, everything is YouTube, and that's where he does his research. He creates videos for projects because it's easier for him to get his thoughts out. So as a communicator, I have to think of the different ways people access it. Another thing that I don't see people doing with their content is creating content calendars. So a content calendar is the easiest way to do it is just get that free calendar you get at the pharmacy every year and just start writing on it. And if you don't know what to write about, November, Thanksgiving in the US, you could do a gratitude blog. You could do a post about gratitude. And so look at what's already happening in the calendar. March is Crazy Sock Day for Down syndrome. April is Autism, I like to say, acceptance month. Enough with the awareness. Autism acceptance month. So we know certain things happen in the calendar, so we can pre-plan our content around that. And with these tools that you've mentioned, you can actually schedule your content in advance. You don't need to sit there every day and go, what am I going to put on my Facebook page? I just finished today for a client doing the entire month of November's Facebook posts. They are done. Because now I can be strategic. I can think about it. I can look at the calendar, what's happening. And then that newsletter we posted, I can grab little nuggets out. So I want you to kind of look at the bigger picture and set aside time to do content. But guess what? If you set aside half a day, the first Monday of the month, you could have content for the whole month and be done.
And that is something that is so easy to do. And yet I think a lot of us get in our own way on those things. And we say, can't, don't have time, have other things to do. And it just really amazes me because I like to take a little time every Sunday and look at my week ahead and see what am I going to do just that week. So taking that another step into the next month or even the next quarter, I do a lot of my planning in quarters. So I'm always thinking in 3-month chunks. What am I going to do the beginning of the year versus summer versus the end of the year? So, like a lot of people, it's the fourth quarter of 2023. So I'm spending a lot of time thinking about next year already. Started thinking about next year last month, actually in October, because that's what we have to do. We have to look ahead. What are we going to do? What's our plan going to be? And then how can we implement that plan? And I can testify that this is what I do. I set aside this time. I set aside, we talk about blocking work time and focus time, whatever. Set aside some time to do some planning and to do some actual focused work. One of my most popular blog posts a couple of years ago was, yes, you can take a sabbatical because and it has to do with planning and focused work time for that deep thought, that deep thinking. Because if you can have 20 minutes of deep thinking, that's like 3 hours of distracted thinking, in my opinion. But like the sabbatical article, I just was sharing that it was a realization that came to me. And to me, it seemed super obvious. And I'm like, oh, let me write about this super obvious thing. Where he's like, oh my God, that's brilliant. I never thought of that. And I was like, oh, okay. So maybe it's not as obvious as I thought. But we're thinking of sabbaticals, for example, as
Mhm.
a 6 month or 1 year thing that you have, and it's like, wow, well, that's usually why academics do it because they're in that position and that's the kind of work they might do. But then I thought about it and I was like, you know what? I could do a 1 week sabbatical. I could just pick a week. And
Mhm.
the first time I did, I picked the week before Memorial Day in the United States because that's a quiet week. And I had a couple of appointments that I couldn't shift. I kept those, but I didn't schedule anything else that week. And so all I did was work and plan and think other than those appointments. And I wrote a blog post about it smack in the middle of the week. And somebody started a group on groups.io to discuss the topic. And I was like, wow, okay, obviously touched on a nerve here. So then
Mhm.
what that evolved into, and this relates to content purposing because evolution, moving things along, that evolved into quiet work days. And
Mm.
so that's one of the reasons, like on Sunday afternoon, I look at my week ahead. If I have no appointments, I block that day out as a quiet work day. And that's when I can sit and think and do work and plan and decide what am I going to do for my messaging for the company, what am I going to do for other content areas. So really just taking that time to plan it, think it. I just love that idea too. You can just get that free calendar from the pharmacy and just start writing all over it. And that's brilliant.
It doesn't need to be complicated. And what I find is when we make it complicated, it doesn't happen.
That's right.
So, looking at your newsletter, if you're doing a newsletter, what are the articles in that newsletter? What are some nuggets? Is there a photo? What are the things that I can share and how can I share it? If you don't know what to write in the newsletter, what month is it? What's happening that month? What are the things? And so you can have some fun with this and then share it with partner organizations, share it with your colleagues. Because I have found I've written I've written the blog, then I've converted it to the ebook. Then I send it to some of my clients because I'm like, I know you're struggling with how to write a crisis communication plan. Here's a 8 pages on what should be in your crisis communication plan. And it's a good way of opening those conversations, but it's also value add that you're sharing your expertise. And like I said, don't assume that just because you put it on your website that people are reading it.
That's right. Well, and yes, because there's so much out there, how are people going to find it? And how can they sift through? Like I have a lot of blog posts built up now. And there are threads, per your comment about, well, you could pull those and turn them into a little ebook to give to people. You have those on the website. It's like, oh my gosh. Because I have, for example, I'm a former chapter relations director, so chapter relations professional. And so I have a lot of blog posts about chapters and working with chapters.
Mhm.
But you would have to dig through the whole blog. And who's going to do that? And how do you know
Nobody.
which one is the chapter one? Because I don't always name things, obviously. and when I say obviously, I mean, it's not obvious it's about chapters all the time.
Mhm.
So, I try to be very clear, like, when board members go bad, that's pretty obvious, and I advocate for, well, they need to be escorted out of the room, sort of like your blog post about 5 reasons to quit your volunteer job, which I have to go back and read that one. That would be a fun topic for next year too, because I actually have quit several volunteer jobs for a lot of reasons. Everything from they don't want volunteers, they want unpaid staff, to they're talking to you like you're an employee, which was actually a separate organization, and the group's not being clear about what you're supposed to be doing. And so that is like a whole other topic for another day. But yeah, but that's sort of a thing. Like, I just love that, Cynthia. You're always thinking and looking at, what can I do with this content?
It's
And
about being strategic with your content, right? It's not just I did content, I dumped it because it's my check mark of things to do today.
mhm,
So you want to have a strategy just like you would for the other work you do. What's your strategy? How does this relate to our strategic plan? How does this relate to our vision, mission, values? How does this? So everything should make sense and should come together. And then your content, like I said, it's about working smarter, not harder. And it's about making your content work for you instead of you working for your content.
that is such a great, succinct statement. I love that. And you and I, a lot of what we do is creating content.
Mhm.
So, if we're not being strategic, which now you're making me wonder if I am, I'm definitely being tactical. I'm not so sure I'm being strategic. So,
Mhm.
that's wonderful. And you also said something a few minutes ago. If we make it complicated, it doesn't get done. And love that statement. I want to support that statement. It's so true, because people confuse complicated with complex.
Yes.
Complicated, it's harder than it needs to be. Complex means it's more than one part.
Hmm.
That's
And so and talk to your team. Who does the content? So that's the other piece is, do we have a consistent brand voice and brand identity? A brand can be one person, it can be an organization, but the problem when you have multiple people is one person's witty, one person's serious, one person's educational, and the content's a reflection of the person that wrote it
Mhm.
versus the organization. So you also, going back to your strategy, want to say, this is how our organization, if our organization was a human being, this is how we speak, this is how we show up. And so anybody who's creating content, or you've hired the 20-something-year-old because they're the only person that knows how to post on the social media, they don't know your organization. They don't know how you speak. So you want to have that front and center so that when you do divide out the content, and I know nonprofits, lots of people have got their hands in many areas, but it doesn't look so such a smorgasbord. It needs to have a common feel to it.
Right. That is an excellent point too, because the organization does have its own voice, no matter who's writing for it. So, wow, that's another great thing to keep in mind. See, and I don't necessarily think about those things all the time, because I work alone, and when I'm working with clients, I will say that to them, but I don't necessarily think about that for me, because sometimes I'm funny, sometimes I'm serious. Anyway, wow, we could just dive into that. But this is
Mhm.
about me. I'm making it about me. It's not about me. It's about content creation and repurposing. And this has been a wonderful conversation on that topic, and lots of great actionable tips in this conversation. So thank you for that. I love it. So, as you know, Cynthia, I'd like to ask my guest for the thought they would like the audience to take away today. And then if you could share your websites again in case people would like to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So the thing that I would like you to leave with is to really make sure that the content that you're creating is something that you care about, something that you are interested in, because it's really hard to write good content when you're not passionate about it. And making sure that it's something that your audience would be of interest. And then if you want to read my content, and you can see on my websites how I repurpose it right on the website. I'm at howtocommunications.com. That's my communication skills and leadership. And then learnpatientadvocacy.com, which is really that self-advocacy, advocating for others.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. You are such a resource, and I am so glad that I met you because
Yeah.
I am always learning from you. It's fantastic. Thank you. So, well, we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So don't forget to subscribe because you don't want to miss anything. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help you bloom outside the box, check out our website, roguetulips.com. We offer a variety of services that are outlined on our services page, along with our fee schedule if you're curious about budgeting for that project we can do together. Now, if you're a nonprofit executive who is looking for education, whether you're getting ready for an exam or you just need some CE for a renewal, check out our education program. It's so big, it has its own website, the 501cleague.net. We're wrapping up the fall session for this year, but we're already working on our 2024 schedule. So stay tuned to that and get updates. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And on behalf of Cynthia and myself, we'll see you next time.